Godless voice here. Life cannot be created from nothing. Fair point. Also, not the point we ever made. Life isn't created from nothing. Life is created through a series of chemical reactions in an environment conducive to these chemical reactions. And what happens is you get a series of simple mechanisms, simple tasks that group together and form a complicated task. For example, you have a series of non-life elements that clump together to make a sort of engine. And that engine then takes on a new simple task of collecting. So you have an engine with a collector. And then that takes on another simple task of having a processor added to it. So it collects, processes, and burns fuel. Now you have something that is self-sustaining. It then figures out how to duplicate itself and begins to replicate. At this point, you now have life. Questionably. It's arguable, but you see where I'm going with this. Never once did it just spontaneously occur. It was a series of little simple processes that came together and then produced a complex process. Because essentially what you have here is you have an engine. You have an engine that collects its own fuel and then reproduces itself and continues to collect fuel. So once we evolved to the point where we are now, we've acquired so many different simple processes that we seem very complex. And we are very complex. We are extremely complex creatures. But that is only because we have a bunch of simple things. If you take any one of our cells, this is a good way of looking at it. Take any one of our cells and, figure out exactly what that cell does. Cell only has a few properties. But depending on what kind of cell it is, will dictate what those properties are. Bone cell, skin cells, blood cells, brain cells, my favorite. Gotta use those brain cells. They collect into a group and form an organ or a system, referencing blood and skeletal system. And then the combination of all these different systems that came together, or all these different little engines or organs or whatever you want to call them, coming together forms an even more complex thing. But wherever you go down the line, or you go down the scale, it is always traceable back to something very simple. Fertilized egg. Egg, sperm. Sperm fertilizes egg. Simple process. Simple process that turns into us. But it doesn't do it spontaneously. It does it through a long series of processes. And one of those processes is also change. So right here you have what I perceive to be the two universal consistencies. Two universal consistencies. Only through a collection of simple processes, can we get a complex process? We don't spontaneously get complex processes anywhere. Astrophysicists might actually argue with me on this point, but barring that, and I'd like to hear the argument for that. I mean, please, if you can correct me, there's a comment section below. Get after it. I take them very seriously. I will read them. I will observe them. I will chew up the information, process it, and see what I get out of it. From simple, do we get complex? Not complex makes simple. Well, complex could make simple, but complex also, the complex process came from a simple process too. This is my point. No process is spontaneously complex or initially complex. It's all simple processes. And I would say that even in astrophysics, they deal with a much greater complex system. And whenever they needle it down through math and science to individual points, it's still factors. It's still a number, a single number representing a single process that they can calculate into this enormously complex process. So I think maybe astrophysicists will probably agree with me that it all starts with simple things. It doesn't start with something that was spontaneously complex. The other universal consistency that I mentioned, and Bionic Dance argues with this, and I say her argument is valid, with the exception that it's non-existent whenever it is valid. She says that change is not a universal consistency. I say everything will change. Change is universal. There will always be change. We get to the point of the end of the universe. That's where her argument sits. The end of the universe, change stops occurring wherever everything falls away into entropy and disassembles, dismantles. All forces are finally disrupted to the point of nullification. Just across the board nullification. Everything flew apart. She says that, once that point hits, then change stops occurring. I have another theory on that, but I'll get into that later. But, for the sake of argument, she is correct. If it hits that point, change no longer occurs. My argument is, if it hits that point, the existence for that argument to be valid is no longer existent. Existence comes to an end. You come into a paradox statement. I'm making a paradox statement to cover my ass here, but it's a valid one. For the point in which her argument of change does not always occur, there is nothing to argue. There is no point. There is no anything there to say, oh, that's right. Nothing's there anymore. You have the ultimate nihilistic wish. Everything is nothing. Or some Buddhist philosophies, which is kind of an odd thing. So yeah, there you go. I have no idea what my topic was, but I'll probably rewatch this video and name it accordingly. Yes. 2 universal consistencies. Only from simple collection of simple processes do we get complex processes. Complex processes do not spontaneously occur. Ever. And change will always occur. Until there is no longer an always.